It was one of those quiet afternoons when everything seemed perfect. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Birds were chirping in the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The park by the river was calm, with families walking, kids playing, and people enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. The air smelled fresh, filled with the scent of grass and the faint odor of the water flowing nearby. In the heart of the park there was a small, quiet area by the riverbank, where the children often gathered after school. Today was no different. The kids had just finished their classes and couldn't wait to race outside. Among them was Jake, a 12-year-old boy with bright, curious eyes and a love for animals. He wasn't the most popular kid in school, but he had a few close friends who liked him for his kind heart. Jake loved this park. He came here almost every day, often to play with his friends or simply sit by the river, watching the water flow peacefully. His thoughts often wandered to his dog Max, who was waiting for him at home. Max wasn't just a pet, he was Jake's best friend. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the park. It was a typical afternoon, calm and uneventful, until something caught Jake's eye. Out in the distance, near the water's edge, something was moving. It looked like a small animal, but it was too far away for Jake to tell. Curiosity sparked within him, but he had no idea what was coming next. Jake's day had been like any other. He woke up early, got ready for school, and headed out, knowing he'd have another day of listening to lessons and chatting with friends. He wasn't much of a troublemaker, but he did enjoy the small adventures that came his way. As the bell rang for lunch, he grabbed his sandwich and rushed out to meet his friends. They always gathered near the swings, where they'd talk about everything from the latest video game to what they had for breakfast. But Jake's mind often wandered. He would glance over at the nearby river, remembering the days when he and Max, his dog, would walk along the bank together. They'd run through the grass, play fetch, and sometimes even cool off by the water. Jake loved animals, especially dogs. Max was his best friend, and their bond was stronger than anything else. He had always dreamed of working with animals when he grew up, but for now, he was content with spending time with his dog and the occasional trip to the park. Every afternoon, without fail, he'd meet his friends here to hang out and forget about the stresses of school. As the afternoon wore on, the group of kids found themselves at their usual spot near the river. Jake felt the familiar pull of the water's edge, where the gentle current swirled and rippled. He stood there for a moment, watching the water flow by, lost in thought. His friends were busy kicking a soccer ball around, laughing and shouting. Jake felt a bit out of place, like he always did when the game wasn't his thing, but something about the quiet peace of the river always drew him in. It was his place to relax, to think, to be away from everything. He smiled to himself, knowing he'd head home soon and spend time with Max. He could already hear the dog's excited barking in his head. It was a normal afternoon, or so it seemed. Jake was lost in his thoughts when something unusual caught his eye. At first he thought it was just a piece of debris floating in the river, but then he saw it move. A small, helpless creature was struggling in the water, its tiny body bobbing up and down as the current pushed it further along. It was a puppy, barely old enough to swim, thrashing and gasping for air. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, he took off running toward the riverbank, his legs pumping faster than ever. His friends, noticing his sudden movement, stopped their game and turned to look. "Hey Jake, what's up?" one of them called, but Jake didn't answer. All he could think about was the puppy in the water, fighting for its life. The river wasn't deep where the puppy was, but the current was strong. Jake's mind raced. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He was the only one who could do something. Without hesitating, he jumped into the water. It was colder than he expected, and the current pushed against him, but he kept moving. His only focus was the puppy. The small animal's head bobbed just above the surface, its eyes wide with panic. Jake reached out, his fingers grazing the puppy's wet fur. For a moment the puppy seemed to slip away, and Jake's heart raced, but he wasn't going to give up. He dove deeper, pushing against the current, and finally grabbed the puppy by the scruff of its neck. The puppy yelped, its small body trembling, but Jake held onto it tightly. His arms were aching from the struggle, but he didn't stop. The water was pulling at him, but he kept kicking his legs, pushing himself toward the shore. Every second felt like an eternity, but finally Jake's feet hit the ground. He pulled the puppy to safety, collapsing onto the wet grass, with the tiny creature in his arms. The puppy was shivering, drenched and exhausted, but alive. Jake breathed heavily, trying to catch his breath. He could hear the other kids now, rushing to his side. They gathered around him, their eyes wide with awe, but Jake only had eyes for the puppy in his arms. It was safe, for now. Jake sat on the grass, holding the puppy close to his chest. His heart was still racing, his breath heavy from the struggle. The little dog trembled in his arms, its tiny body shivering from the cold, but it wasn't gasping for air anymore. It was alive. Jake gently stroked its fur, his fingers shaking slightly. "Is it okay?" one of his friends asked, kneeling beside him. Jake nodded, his eyes not leaving the puppy. "I think so, just scared," he murmured. The other kids gathered around, each of them wide-eyed, staring at Jake as though he'd done something extraordinary. One of the girls in the group, Emma, spoke up. "That was amazing, Jake. You really saved that puppy." Jake shrugged, not knowing how to respond. It wasn't about being praised, it had been about doing the right thing. He didn't even think about what might happen if he didn't act. He just knew the puppy needed help, and that was enough. As the puppy began to calm down, Jake carefully set it on the ground, wrapping his jacket around it to warm it up. The puppy's eyes were wide and frightened, but it seemed to understand it was safe now. It looked up at Jake with gratitude, its tail giving a tiny wag. Jake smiled, relieved to see it was okay. He patted the puppy's head gently, speaking softly to it. "It's all right now, little guy, you're safe." The other kids stood quietly, some of them still in awe of what they had just witnessed. Jake wasn't looking for attention, but he couldn't help feeling a little proud. He had done something good today, he'd saved a life. Just as Jake was starting to relax, thinking the day was finally over, something strange happened. He heard a voice, one that didn't belong to any of his friends. "Hey, is this the kid who saved the puppy?" Jake looked up in confusion. Standing at the edge of the group was a man wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. He looked familiar, but Jake couldn't quite place him. The man was smiling, looking at Jake with genuine interest. It wasn't until the guy stepped closer that it hit him. "Wait," Jake whispered, his eyes widening. "Are you?" The man grinned and nodded. "Yeah, I'm Keanu. Keanu Reeves, the actor. The one from movies like The Matrix and John Wick." Jake's mind went blank. He had seen him on TV, of course, but never imagined he'd actually meet him, especially not here, in a quiet park by the river. The other kids were equally stunned. Some of them were whispering to each other, barely able to believe their eyes. Keanu continued to smile warmly at Jake, his gaze kind and unassuming. "I heard about what you did," Keanu said, his voice calm but full of respect. "I just wanted to come over and say thank you, you saved that little guy's life today." Jake could hardly process what was happening. Keanu Reeves was standing right in front of him, talking about him. He felt like he was in a dream. He glanced over at his friends, who were all looking at him in disbelief. None of them could seem to find words either. "You're amazing, kid," Keanu continued, his tone sincere. "That was brave. Most people would have just stood there and watched, but you didn't. You did something." Jake blinked, trying to collect his thoughts. "I didn't even think about it. I just had to help." Keanu's smile widened. "That's exactly what makes you special. You saw something that needed to be done, and you did it." The world seemed to stop for a moment, as Jake stood there, not knowing how to respond. Keanu Reeves, the Keanu Reeves, was telling him he was special. Keanu stayed for a while, talking with Jake and the other kids. It felt like time slowed down, and every word Keanu said seemed to carry weight. Jake wasn't sure how to react, but he couldn't stop listening. Keanu wasn't just talking about movies or fame, he was talking about real life. "You know," Keanu said, sitting down beside Jake on the grass, Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness make the biggest impact. You might not think it, but saving that puppy today is something that'll stick with you forever. It shows you what you're capable of when you step up. Jake nodded, still processing everything. He had always admired Keanu for his roles on the big screen, but seeing him in person, being so kind and down to earth, made Jake realize that this wasn't just a movie star, this was someone who really cared about the world around him. Keanu leaned in a little, lowering his voice, so only Jake could hear. I've had my fair share of moments where I've had to make tough decisions, moments where helping others was all I could do. And you know what, you'll face those moments too, and you'll be ready. You've already proven that today. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. Keanu was right, he hadn't thought about the danger or the cold water, he just acted because it was the right thing to do. And now, to hear someone like Keanu, someone who had seen so much in his life, tell him that he had done something important, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference too. After a moment, Keanu pulled something small from his pocket, a keychain with a tiny silver dog on it. Here, he said, handing it to Jake. A little reminder that there's always a way to help, no matter how big or small. Jake took the keychain, feeling his chest swell with pride. This wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of everything Keanu had said, the bravery, the kindness, and the reminder that sometimes doing the right thing could change everything. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Keanu kept in touch with Jake. It wasn't anything big, just occasional messages or short meetups at the park. But to Jake, it felt like something huge. Keanu didn't have to do this. He was a famous actor with a busy life, but he took the time to check in on Jake, offering him advice and encouragement. At first, it was just small conversations, like the one they had when Keanu had visited the park. Keanu would tell Jake stories from his own life, about times when he had to step up, when he had to make hard choices, and how kindness always played a part in it. Jake, in turn, found himself sharing more about his own life. He told Keanu about Max, his dog, about his dreams of working with animals, and how he had never really thought of himself as someone who could do anything special. But Keanu listened carefully. Sometimes he said, "You don't realize what you're capable of until you're in the middle of it. Helping that puppy. That was you stepping up. And you'll keep doing that." Jake was amazed by how easy it was to talk to Keanu. The actor didn't treat him like a fan or a kid, he treated him like an equal, someone who could understand what it meant to be brave, to be kind, and to want to make a difference. It was like having a mentor, someone who genuinely cared about his growth and well-being. The more time they spent together, the more Jake began to change. He started helping more animals in his neighborhood, rescuing stray dogs, feeding birds, and even helping out at the local animal shelter. He felt a new sense of purpose, something that had been missing before. It wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about doing good, just like Keanu had taught him. And all the while, the little puppy, who had come to be named Scout, followed him everywhere, now healthy and happy, a reminder of that one unforgettable day.